Ephesians 6 in verse 16 says, "Above all, taking the shield of faith, wherewith ye shall be able to quench all the fiery darts of the wicked." This verse reminds me of the book of Job. As we look at what happened to Job, Satan sent all the fiery darts he could at him. But Job had the shield of faith and quenched all of them. But that process was very difficult. If we turn back to the book of Job, we see the things that have happened to him and how difficult a life was for him. Satan has been given the ability to take all that Job had, and so he, of course, took all of his substance, all of his possession, all the animals that he possessed, his means of feeding his family is all gone, and then his sons and daughters were killed by a great wind that tore down the house where they were. And that's where we left it last week. At the end of the book, end of the first chapter of Job, Job arose, rent his mantle, shaved his head, fell down upon the ground and worshipped. And this is what he said: "Naked came I out of my mother's womb, and naked shall I return thither. The Lord gave, and the Lord hath taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." In all this Job sinned not, nor charged God foolishly. So this was the first attack of Satan on Job. Now, of course, all of this is not about Job. It's about Satan trying to defeat God. And in order to defeat God, he tries to defeat him within the heart of Job. But he is, of course, unsuccessful. As we open up chapter 2, another challenge is given in the second attack of Satan on Job comes. All right, so here's a second appearance like the first. It says, "Again, there was a day." It's thought that this most likely, the sort of the Jewish tradition of it is that this was a year later. Now, we're not specified exactly here how much time has passed between chapter 1 and chapter 2, but the Jewish tradition, whether it was right or wrong, we don't know, was 1 year. And so this was not, the next day. All right, there's an implication of the passage of some time when it says, "Again, there was a day." So if it was talking about the next day, that's most likely what it would say. But sometime later, as the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, Satan, like he was the first time, is among them, and the Lord asked him the same question: "Where have you come from? What have you been doing?" And Satan has been doing the same thing he was before, from going to and fro in the earth and from walking up and down in it. All right, so the Lord once again brings up Job to Satan, just like he did the first time, and with the same description of Job. And that's very important. Satan's first accusation against Job, that if God removed the hedge that had been put around him, that Job would curse him to his face, that accusation was wrong, because that didn't happen. And we see that not happening there at the end of chapter 1, where he continued to bless the name of the Lord. This time God adds this tag to it: he still holds fast his integrity. What he was before is what he continues to be. He's still strong. He still has his moral integrity, his faith in God, the loyalty to him, even though, and notice how God describes the action of chapter 1. "Thou movest me against him to destroy him without cause." In the Bible, and this is an important thing to know in order to understand God and the happenings of this life, is that a lot of times describes what God allows as he himself doing it. And even he uses that type of figurative language here, because he says, you moved me against him. I'm the one who destroyed him without cause. Well, God wasn't actually the one who did it. Satan was. That's very clear from chapter 1. But God allowed it. God gave his permission to it. And so he says, even though you moved me against him and I allowed you to tempt him in this way, he still holds fast his integrity. He has not left me one little bit. And then Satan brings forth his next accusation against Job. Skin for skin, yea, all that a man hath will he give for his life. Yeah, you let me take his stuff, but you haven't let me actually touch him. He has not been physically affected by this. Of course, he was emotionally affected by it, but he has not been physically affected by anything yet. And so if his life is threatened, if the proverbial gun is put to his head, he'll curse God to his face. Satan continues his accusation. Put forth your hand now and touch his bone and flesh. You physically hurt him, and he'll curse you to your face. Take away his health, he'll curse you. And the Lord accepts this challenge. Says he's in your hand. You go tempt him this way. But he says, save his life. Right? He's not actually going to face death. Instead, what Job faces, as we find out from what he says about it, is much worse. Job wished his life would be taken. Job wanted to die. His suffering was so great. In fact, we're going to find out he wanted to never have been born. His suffering was so great. Satan is going to throw every fiery dart he has at Job. And we'll see how Job comes through it. Satan goes and does it. So Job has these sore boils that cover his body, from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head, head to toe. He is covered in this nasty sores that came up all over his body, and they obviously itched very badly because he took a potsherd, a broken piece of pottery, to scratch himself with it, to scrape those boils, and he sat down among the ashes in mourning, his life having been ruined. What a terrible, terrible enemy we have in Satan, who has done this thing to Job. In my original outline, I ended this section after verse 10 and began the next section of verse 11, talking about Satan's allies. I may have made a mistake there. I probably should have started Satan's allies in verse 9, because that's what the wife becomes. So this is the first mention of his wife. We have assumed up to this point that he had a wife because he had children. But now she comes into play. And this is her statement in verse 9. Do you still retain thine integrity? Now remember what God told Satan earlier in the chapter. He still holds his integrity. He still is faithful. And now Job's wife sees Job. Their lives have been ripped apart. And that's important to realize about Job's wife. She lost everything too. She had gone through great suffering through this. And we also know how difficult it is for spouses to see their loved one go through such pain and agony. And so Satan's wife is not just some stranger coming in with a cold heart, telling him just to curse God and die. Here is someone who has been suffering right along with Job. Her health wasn't affected like his was, but she had to see that and probably had to tend to him and all that. And we know that there's a lot of stress and a lot of anguish that comes from that. And so we see a weakness in Job's wife here. Now, when she says, curse God and die, one of the interesting things about the Hebrew language, especially this word, bless and curse are the same word. And the context tells you which it is. Now, that doesn't make any sense to us whatsoever. How could we have a word that means the opposite of itself? But some have taken this to mean that she means just, do your worship of God and go ahead and die. But that doesn't really fit with what he says back to her and her first statement. Why do you still retain your integrity? Go ahead and curse God. At that point, God will kill you, and all this suffering will be over, was Job's wife's thought. And so we have another piece of suffering here for Job. Not only has he lost everything, his health has taken it, but now his wife has caused this additional stress of her basically saying she wants him to go ahead and die rather than to continue suffering. And so he calls her a fool. Thou speakest as one of the foolish women speaketh, which tells us that Job's wife was not a foolish woman. Maybe Job would have said, you're speaking like you always do, if she was, but she's not. This was outside of Job's wife's character. And so Job calls her on that and says, this is not how you think. This is not how you would normally speak to me. You're speaking like one of those other type of women. Will we receive all this good at the hand of God and then curse him when we receive bad? It's the similar thought that he said back in verse 21. Naked came I out of my mother's womb, and naked shall I return thither. The Lord gave, and the Lord hath taken away. Will we receive good and not evil? Now, evil there does not mean, he is not charging God with doing moral evil. Evil means calamity, this tragedy, terrible thing that's happened. And a lot of times when we read the word evil in the Bible, that's what it's referring to, rather than simple moral evil, but a terrible thing that's happened, a tragedy, a crisis, a calamity of some kind. And so this statement is made of Job like it was in the first chapter, and all this did not Job sin with his lips. Now, because some people have this method of interpreting the Bible that because it specifies with his lips, that meant he sinned in some other way. That's not what's meant. Just because something is specified doesn't mean that it allows other things beyond it. It's just saying that in what Job has said about this situation, he has not sinned, he's not turned his back against God. Even though he has a technically incorrect view of what's happened to him. All right, so that sort of ends that section, and now we have the section that's going to take us through the next most of the book, all right, up to chapter 37. And this conversation that happens with Job and his friends. Now, these are friends. These are people who care deeply about Job, who are very concerned about him, so concerned that they have traveled a distance to be with Job. Now, if we look at where these folks are from, all of these people are from the Arabian desert. All right. Eliphaz the Temanite. Teman was in the area of Edom, where Edom was going to be once Esau was born and a nation came from him. And so that's just on the east side of the Dead Sea, not the Red Sea, the Dead Sea. All right. It's thought that these other two, Bildad the Shuhite and Zophar the Naamathite, were from nomadic tribes that lived in different places in the Arabian desert. Now, the Arabian desert is that area between Babylon, the Euphrates River, Tigris River, and where Israel would settle later on, the Promised Land. Okay, that vast desert. And so most of the tribes of that area were nomadic and from different areas within it. It's thought that Job, being from Uz, while Uz, we don't know exactly where it is, they think there are two, well, I guess there are three different majority opinions on that. One is that it was close to around where Edom was. Other where Syria was, which is directly north of Edom on the east side of the Jordan River, up above the Sea of Galilee, up in that area. Or on the east side of the Arabian Desert, close to where the Euphrates River was, and sort of that more fertile area over there. It seems that that's most likely. Remember that his animals were attacked by two different groups. One was the Chaldeans, and the other was a tribe. What were they called? The Sabaeans. And I misspoke last time about the Sabaeans. I said that it was in the Arabian Peninsula. I meant Arabian Desert. And they're thought to be in the north part of that. And so that would sort of lend itself over to that area of the world. But so his friends, one the Temanite, one the Shuhite, and the Naamathite, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, they come to see Job, to mourn with him and to comfort him. Again, these are friends. Friends with the wrong idea about what's going on. Friends who are not going to have the words to comfort Job and are going to make the situation worse. But they still are friends. They love Job. They want what's best for him. So they're sincere, but they're wrong, and are going to have to repent and ask for Job's forgiveness later. When they see him, their reaction was much the same as Job's when he got all the bad news. They lifted up their voice, they wept, they tore their clothing, and they sprinkled dust on their heads toward heaven. They were shocked by what they saw in Job and the state that he was in. You know, they had heard about the evil that had come upon Job, but hearing about it and seeing it firsthand are two completely different things. And we see their great love for Job and their concern, their sincere concern for Job in this. And in the beginning, they do the exact right thing because there's nothing for them to say. And Job sits there in silence as well. But they sat down with him 7 days and 7 nights, a whole week. They just sat there in silence. We have a different attitude toward grief that a lot of the ancients had and what other cultures have today, where we are in a hurry to get past it. All right, so our loved one dies, within 2 to 3 days, there's a funeral, they're buried, everybody goes home, and folks go back to work and move on. And some of that is unhealthy, that we need to take time to grieve certain things. And there are different levels of grief that would cause a different amount of time to handle that. Eventually we have to go on with life. But a lot of times we're in a big hurry to do that. Job and his friends were not. Job wasn't going anywhere. His friends gave up their lives for these 7 days to go and just sit with a man. And they could see the amount of grief that he was going through. All right, Job chapter 3. After this, Job opened his mouth and cursed his day. And from this context, we find out exactly what his day means when he was born, his birthday. In most of Job's speeches, this one's a little different because he is down the whole time during this speech. But in his subsequent parts of the conversation, he starts off low in a deep depression. About midway through, he finds glimmers of hope and sort of begins to lift out of it, and then ends in a depression again. It's interesting to see how Job goes through this grief and speaks about it. And we can relate to the feelings that he has as he voices all this concern that he has about why these things are happening. And then, having to defend himself against his friends as well. This is the theme of his opening remarks. I wish the day that I was born would be wiped off the history books. That God wouldn't regard it from above, no light on it. It's just a day of darkness like it never existed. That the day would perish where it was born, where they made the announcement that this man-child is, this boy is conceived. That it would just be gone. So Job isn't just merely wishing for death here. He is wishing for his existence to never have happened because of how much he's suffering. That's a very dark thought that he has. It's hard to imagine having a thought like that. But that's where Job's at the moment.